My name's Tamara, I'm a nomad, and I'm currently backpacking across Central and Latin America. I've just recently spent about 10 days in Colombia, and I wanted to get on here to talk a little bit about the pros and cons and explain also why I'm currently not in Colombia as I record this video. I have actually already moved on to Ecuador, so here is a little bit of information about why I did not stay very long. The first pro is that Colombia is very beautiful, particularly the place that I visited that I spent most of those 10 days in. I was in Puerto Colombia. This is a fishing village on the Caribbean coast. So the weather was wonderful, very hot, there were gorgeous beaches. It was a really lovely town as well, very colonial style architecture and really beautiful kind of hill mountainside that flows down into the beach. So I really enjoyed just seeing the views there, spending time on the rooftop restaurants and really soaking in the sun while I was there. Aside from Puerto Colombia, Colombia has so many different environments, and so you can go hiking to the hills, you can go check out the mountains, you can check out the more interior areas and cobblestone towns. So there's a huge variety in the aesthetic of Colombia. There's not one particular visual identity that it has, and there's so much to see. So this is one thing that I really loved about being in Colombia, was just enjoying the beauty. Now, the first con about Colombia is that as a tourist, there is a tourist tax. So a lot of people warned me before going that there is a restaurant upcharge for foreigners, and they might add additional 10-15% onto your bill because they are assuming that you have a little bit more money, and this is just a way that they are able to get a little bit over on you. It's just the reality of the situation. They know that you're not going to argue about the total on the bill. Maybe you'll have questions, but at the end of the day, if they're asking you to pay so you can leave, you have to pay that. And I experienced this multiple times eating out in Colombia where I was upcharged. I'll talk a little bit about the exchange rate later, because that also plays a part. Another pro is the rich history of Colombia. Colombia holds one of the first free cities for enslaved Africans in all of America. So there is a really rich history, a lot of different backgrounds and people of all sorts of different colors. A lot of cities have a town square where there are museums and a lot of plaques and information that you can read about the founding of that town. It's a really cool, interesting thing, and if you're interested in history, then definitely spending time in Cartagena or Medellin are great places for you to really learn about the richness and the history of Colombia. It's really, really interesting and very rich if that's something that you'd like to research. Now, the next con is something that was a bit of a con for me, but maybe it won't be such an issue for you, is that motorcycle taxis are one of the most common ways to get around. And I think this is very common for all of the major cities in Colombia, where there are yellow taxis that you can take, as well as Uber, which is in the Uber application is allowed in Colombia cities. But the most common and efficient way to get around are motorcycle taxis. Usually if you're walking on the street, you'll see a group of, men standing with their taxis, and if you just walk up to them and ask them to take you from one place to the next, then usually they're like, yep, hop on, and it'll cost maybe $3 to get someplace. So it's really reasonable, but it was a bit of a con for me because I don't have a lot of experience riding a motorcycle and I was just really nervous. It's also not super clear how to identify which motorcycle people are taxis, and it was a little difficult for me to identify which person was a motorcycle taxi or if they're just a casual person with a motorcycle. I ended up being able to find a motorcycle taxi by just asking, but it's not so obvious. And this kind of goes into my next con with the traffic, but I'll talk about that after this pro, which is that there is a high Afro-Latino population. So I talked about the rich history, but this is something that I really find a pro, is that there are so many people, my skin color or darker, that are of African descent, and you can learn so much about the community and culture and how they've integrated the African culture and brought it into Colombian spaces. So places like Choco or Cartagena have really strong African roots, and you can see it in the murals on the walls. You can see it in the people that are walking on the street, and there's so much diversity. Just in general, if you're a person who really wants to experience more of the unique African cultures while traveling Latin America, I think that Colombia is a really great place for you to go to find communities like that. Another con is the traffic, especially in major cities. This is just an issue with tons of major cities all over the world, but definitely in the Colombian major cities, there is just so much traffic, and the streets are usually really crowded with motorcycles. So because there are so many motorcycle taxis, and this is one of the most common ways to get around, you will find that it can be a bit overwhelming if you are driving. I personally did not have to drive. Like I said, I took a motorcycle taxi or Uber when I was getting around, but even in the Uber, our trip slowed down. What was supposed to be at one point a 1 hour trip turned into a 2 hour trip because we were really stopped up and just surrounded by motorcycles. So this is something that I find a bit of a con, but definitely it's on your preference, and if you have the patience for that, it's definitely worth it for you to get around the city and enjoy all the things that Colombia has to offer. The next pro is that it is well established. So when I was there, I felt like it was a bit of more of a first world country. It was definitely a lot more established than I expected. There are banks, hospitals, all the roads are well paved. As an American, sometimes we are not really well versed in the state of different countries and how things are operating over there. A lot of propaganda that I learned growing up is just that other places are not even developed. So coming out here, it was not so much of a shock, but more of a like, wow, this is a really good thing. So I feel like it is definitely a pro to know and let you guys know that Colombia is well established. There are buses, there are cabs, taxis, Ubers, there is food delivery services. So you have all the conveniences of the first world countries that you're coming from. The next con is something that you might hear a lot. It's called no Dar Papaya. It means do not make yourself a target. This is just some general advice for moving around in all big cities, but especially in Colombia. Robberies do happen, theft happens, and another thing is motorcycle theft. So people will drive by and snatch your phone out your hand if you're holding it. So this kind of means just don't make yourself a target. Hold on to your belongings tightly. Maybe sometimes if you're a very friendly person and you try to go out and talk to a lot of people and really put yourself out there, definitely be very careful about the people that you're talking to. Stay aware of your surroundings and the vibes. Although there is a strong police force in a lot of major cities, it is very quick for you to make the wrong turn down a street and not realize that this is a dangerous street. So you have to pay attention to the neighborhoods that you're actually staying in when you come to Colombia. Do your research and make sure that you're in a safe walking neighborhood, and make sure that you know where the limitations are and where you should and shouldn't walk. The next pro is that Colombia has really great schools. I was actually searching out volunteering opportunities, and I was doing research on the schools in different areas of Colombia to see how I can participate and support the community, whether that's participating in art projects or being an English teacher. And so I was able to visit a few schools in the community, and I was talking with one of the principals, and he was explaining to me the rigorous program, and a lot of schools there actually use the International Baccalaureate program. So you might have heard of this. They have this in the States as well. So a lot of schools in Colombia are sister schools for schools in South Korea, the United States, and they have a really strong academic program that builds their students up and allows them to pursue higher education. So a lot of their students receive scholarships for higher education, and they have a really high graduation rate. If you do your research and you're interested in going to college in Colombia as well, I passed at least 20 colleges on my way to Puerto Colombia after landing in the Baranquilla Airport. So this is definitely the place for education if that's something you're looking for, to have a unique cultural experience while you pursue your education. Another con is the Pesos exchange rate. I previously mentioned that this can be a little confusing. So far what I found is that 30,000 pesos is equal to about 10 US dollars. These numbers are really large, and it's not really mental math that you can do compared to other places where you're like, okay, I'm just multiplying by 5 or dividing by 3. this is a bit different, and so I had to really rely on the Google updated exchange rate to make sure that I'm clear on what it costs to pay. And I had my phone out a lot more than I would have liked to, because I was constantly trying to calculate how much I was spending and how much different things cost. That caused a lot of confusion for me, and I think when I was purchasing things from people, whether it be at a small market or at a restaurant, they could see this confusion on my face, and I think that's also another reason why I was upcharged as a tourist, because I clearly don't understand the value of money there. If you are coming to Colombia, definitely do your research and maybe practice a little bit if you need to pull out a worksheet and do some math problems and really familiarize yourself with the costs of different things so that you know what it costs when you're looking at a menu. That might really help you get along. Another pro in Colombia is that a lot of cities have been revitalized since the cartel presence and a lot of the stereotypes that you usually hear about. There is a very strong police force, as I mentioned, and if you talk to the locals, they will tell you that there is like a current war on drugs going on in Colombia where the locals are not having it anymore, and there is a really strong sense of wanting to rebuild the community. There's a lot of artwork that reflects that in the areas as well. If you pay attention to murals and graffiti, a lot of the locals are really trying to take back their identity and show that we are a lot more rich in dance, salsa, art, history, music, outside of any fears that you have about any sort of gang presence. This really was not something that I noticed at all. And of course I stayed in the safer areas, so I wouldn't completely know, but the locals told me that that is just a stereotype. Another con is that there is aggressive catcalling in Colombia. So of course catcalling happens all over the world, and this is just something that we have to get used to. But in Colombia, it was a lot more aggressive for me than I have experienced anywhere else throughout my travels. I have a short story for this. Because I am a foreigner and a lot of people recognize that I'm not from the area, I actually was approached in close proximity by a lot of men who were offering to pay me for services because they want to know what it's like to be with a foreign Black woman. So this made me really super uncomfortable, and I was on edge a lot more walking around the city than I would have planned to be. Even in the safer areas, like walking on the boardwalk, I was approached by these men and they made me really uncomfortable. And even just wearing normal clothes like what I have on right now, just a jacket, and I'm doing something simple, you know, buying ice cream, someone is approaching me, and I felt almost as if they were treating me like a prostitute, the way that I was being catcalled so aggressively out there. It was really uncomfortable, and that's probably the biggest reason why I had to leave Colombia early, because I just did not feel comfortable there. Although I did feel generally safe and secure, it was not a place that I felt like I could stay for long, because I don't appreciate being treated so differently because I'm a foreigner. The final pro for this video is that the Baranquilla Airport is very chill. Barranquilla is a big city on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. You can fly in internationally to the Ernesto Airport. From there, you can travel 2 hours north to Santa Marta beaches, or you can travel 2 hours south to Cartagena. Santa Marta and Cartagena both have their own airports as well, but I would highly recommend flying into Barranquilla because it was a small airport, but it was also not busy at all. Getting through immigration took me only about 45 minutes. Compared to other airports like the Medellin airport, people have said that it takes at least 3 to 4 hours just getting through the immigration line. It took me 45 minutes, and then on my outbound flight from Colombia, I was able to go through security in about 20 minutes. And then the final con of this video is the sewage system. Although Colombia is very well established and they have a lot going on for them, a lot of conveniences that you would find in any other big cities around the world, one issue that has been consistent over the past few years that I've heard from people is that the sewage system is having some trouble with overflow. I mean, even during my time in Barranquilla, I had to tiptoe around a whole street flooded with gray water from the sewage system. And this is common in other big cities like Medellin, Santa Marta, Cartagena, there have been a lot of floods due to the sewage system. Because of the huge amount of pressure on the system, there have been backups, floods, and it doesn't seem like a lot is happening in terms of the government to fix this issue. So talking with one of the locals, they let me know that this has been going on for at least the past 3 years, and it has become more routine that certain streets are flooded every day with gray water, with caca water, and no one is doing anything. There are a couple lawsuits in action because it is something that could cause sicknesses. Hopefully in the future, this issue is remediated, but right now, as of March 2026, there is not a solution in progress, and so this is something you really should know if you are deciding to visit Colombia sometime soon.
Que están estas construcciones aquí alrededor es cuando ya esto no da más. Que yo sepa, hay muchas demandas y todas esas cuestiones a raíz de esto.
So these are all the pros and cons that I have for Colombia. I really hope to have spent a lot more time in Colombia, but just being there for 10 days, I realized that this is not the place for me. I went in a little bit too flexible, and so I would definitely say, just one last piece of advice, if you're going to Colombia, have a very clear itinerary every day, the things that you're going to do, the places that you're going to be, the neighborhoods, the areas, and the people that you're going to talk to. Maybe find locals and connections in advance, not like me where I went in not knowing anybody and I met people who ended up trying to get one over on me. So I hope that you are safe and no Dar Papaya in Colombia. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section down below.